welcome to our slice of Alaska. In this week's video, I'm going to be talking about gardening, mainly about plants and how many plants do you need to put in your garden for your harvest. Question that I get asked a lot this time of the year is, Dee, how many plants do I know how to plant? I don't know how many plants to put in my garden. Well, after a lot of trial and error and doing some research on how different plants, what they produce, and how much produce that you can expect to get from a plant, and then we do the math and we figure out about how many plants we need to plant. And I'll try to help you do that in this video. So come along with me and let's take a look at it. A common question that I get asked a lot about my garden is, how many plants do I need to start? How many plants do I need for my garden? First off, it depends if you're growing for just fresh food or if you're growing to preserve your food. In my garden, I grow to preserve food. I try to put up as much food as I can for the year. And that makes a big difference on how much you plant and how big of a garden that you're going to need. To get the most out of my garden, I plant food that we're actually going to eat. I don't waste a lot of my garden space on things that we kind of like, but we really don't like. I try to grow as much as I can of the foods that I know we are going to consume at our homestead. So with that, let's take a look at a few foods that I planted last year. Okay. The first thing I figure out is about how often am I going to eat this particular food. If I'm going to eat 1 quart a week, then I'm going to need 52 quarts of that item. And that'll tell you about how much you need to grow or how many plants you need. So let's take green beans, for instance. My goal for the green beans is 52 quarts a year. Here we eat about 1 quart a week. So that gives me the 52 quarts. So it takes about 2 pounds of green beans for a quart. And so with 52 quarts times the 2, I would need to grow 104 pounds of green beans. So you might ask, well, how many plants is that? A plant averages about a half a pound of green beans per plant. Let's just average that. Some plants will give you more, some plants will give you less. But on an average, let's say a half a pound of green beans per plant. So 104 pounds, I would need 208 plants. Now, it sounds like a lot, but beans don't mind to be crowded. You can plant them closer together. I plant my beans like 2 to 3 inches apart, and then I'll plant 2 beans together because they just seem to do better that way. So once you figure out how long your row is, you could be able to figure out how many plants you fit in that row. And it doesn't take as much space as you think with that particular product. So now let's take a look at tomatoes. We'll say an average tomato plant will yield about 10 pounds of tomatoes. That would be up here in Alaska. Down in the lower 48 where you have a longer growing season and you can get your plants out in May and they can stay in the garden until the end of September, you're probably going to do a lot better than that. But up here with our short growing season, if I when I plant my plants out into the garden, I can't plant my plants until the second week of June. I have planted them in the first week of June for twice and froze them all. But if I wait till after the start of the second week of June, then my stuff doesn't freeze. So if you figure that on 10-pound yield per plant, so let's back up. So I'll give you an example. If you have a goal of, say, 21 quarts of spaghetti sauce, if you ate spaghetti twice a month, it would last you about 42 weeks. It'd get you pretty close. But for the sake of math, let's do the 21 quarts of spaghetti sauce. So you figure a 10-pound yield on your plants. It takes about 30 pounds of tomatoes for 7 quarts. So that would mean you're going to need 90 pounds of tomatoes, which is about 9 plants at 10 pounds of tomatoes per plant. It's pretty close. That would be pretty close. Say if you wanted to do tomato sauce, and say your goal of tomato sauce is 20 quarts. It takes about 5 pounds of tomatoes per quart. By the time you cook them down, you got to redo some and cook them down. So you figure about 5 pounds of tomatoes per quart. At the 10-pound yield rate of the plant, you'll need about 100 pounds of tomatoes. So that is about 10 plants. So in this here example, for 21 quarts of spaghetti sauce and 20 quarts of tomato sauce, you'll need about 19 plants. There's a lot of information online that you can look up for how many, like a bushel of tomatoes, 50 pounds of tomatoes will give you so many quarts, or 20 pounds of tomatoes will give you so many quarts. You just type that into Google and it'll come up and it'll give you pretty close to what that is. And so if you go back and figure about 5 pounds of tomatoes per your quart, and your tomato plant on average in Alaska, you can say about 10 pounds plus or minus. Some you're going to get more, some you're not. So just an average on that. It'll give you pretty close to how many plants you need to plant. Last year I planted 100 tomato plants. It's a lot of tomato plants. I know it sounds like a lot, but I can whole tomatoes. I can a lot of tomato sauce, and I like to cook my tomato sauce down thick so it takes more. I make spaghetti sauces. I make ketchup, barbecue sauce, salsa. I make all of that stuff with my tomatoes. So to have enough to try to last me for the year, I need a lot of tomatoes because I make a lot of tomato-based products. Even at that, making everything I needed for the year, and I had about 80 pounds of tomatoes too many from what I needed. And so I donated some and I sold some. So it helps offset your garden a little bit if you can sell a few things. But I like to donate to the food pantry also. So this year, because I run about 80 pounds too many, and I've got a lot of tomato stuff in my pantry, I am going to put in 60 to 70 plants this year. And we're going to see how that goes. I don't want to get too far ahead in my canning that I've got stuff sitting on the shelf for 2 and 3 years. I don't like to do that either. So, but it all depends how much you use as to how many you're going to plant. Another thing we can look at is peppers. So you figure an average pepper plant will give you about 3 pounds of peppers. And you can figure about a pound of peppers per pint. I don't do peppers in anything bigger than a pint. So that all depends how much salsa you want, how much you think you're going to go through in a year. I did pickled peppers. I made a lot of salsa. So if you figure you want, say, 15 pounds or 15 pints of salsa, and figure 1 pound per pint of peppers on the average, and a plant gives you 3 pounds, you would need about 5 pepper plants for that. At 3 pounds per plant will give you 15 pounds, and a pound per pint for figure for your salsa. So you need about 5 plants. So you can kind of roughly guess with that. Now potatoes, I've read that the average for potatoes is 4 pounds per plant. I think in my garden, I run a little more than that, but we'll just go with the average. We'll just use the average. So if you wanted 100 pounds of potatoes, you would need to plant about 25 plants for roughly 100 pounds of potatoes. Like I said, I think it's more than that. I don't remember how many tomato plants I had last year. I had quite a few, but I did about 400 pounds of potatoes. And for here at our homestead with the potatoes, I can a lot of potatoes. I like to can the reds because they can better. And then I plant reds and I plant Yukon Golds. And I use most of my reds for canning. And then my Yukon Golds, I like to make mashed potatoes, just like you would serve for dinner, and put them in freezer bags and lay them and squish them down flat so they freeze flat. And then I put them in the freezer. And when you thaw them out and heat them up, you can't tell the difference between if you just made them or you pulled them out of the freezer. And then I make French fries. And I store some for baked potatoes and, things like that. So that's about where you're at with that. I have a lot of canned potatoes this year, so I won't be planting as many potatoes, but I will probably do in the area of 250 pounds of potatoes this year. I would need about 50 to 60 plants for that. Figure 25 plants per 100 pounds. And if I want 200 pounds of potatoes, I put 50 plants in. And then carrots. Now carrots really depend on the variety that you plant. Like I plant Scarlet Nantes and I plant Danver 126s. You plant, the Scarlet Nantes don't get as big as the Danvers, but they're so tasty. So it takes about 5 medium-sized carrots per pound, okay, on average. And you can figure it takes about 2.5 pounds of carrots for a quart. It takes, time you slice them all up, it takes quite a few carrots to fill the quart jar. And in my pantry, I like about 25 quarts of carrots. And so what I would need for 25 quarts of carrots is I would need 62.5 pounds of carrots. So you take that 62.5 and times it by the 5 carrots per pound, and I would need about 312-ish plants. That's not real hard to get with carrots because, carrots are only spaced out an inch or two apart, but that's about how you can judge your carrots. Your cabbages. Now cabbage, it all depends what variety you're growing. I grow the Golden Acre. My biggest head last year was, I remember now, 9 or 11 pounds. But they all don't get that big. But I would say my cabbage is averaging about probably 6 to 7 pounds a head. Because the Golden Acre is a nice dense head, but it doesn't get, it's not going to get great big like this. It's going to be a nice head, kind of like what you get in the grocery store, maybe a little bit bigger than ones in the grocery store, but they're real dense like that. So if you're growing cabbage for fresh eating, you won't need as many. Figure out, you make coleslaw, or you can, fried cabbage, stuff like that. Stuff that, that you would consume that cabbage relatively quick. It'll store for a little while, but it's not going to store real long. You're not going to get months and months and months out of it. At least I don't. I wish I did, but I don't. Now, if you want to make sauerkraut, it takes a little more for your sauerkraut. It takes about 5 pounds of cabbage for a gallon of sauerkraut. So, on a gallon of sauerkraut, I make sauerkraut and I use probably 2 quarts a batch. So that's a half a gallon. So figure out about how often you're going to eat sauerkraut, and then that would give you an idea of how much sauerkraut you would make. So last year I had grown 25 heads of cabbage, and I had plenty of cabbage for what I wanted. I made sauerkraut with it. I like coleslaw and stuff like that for fresh eating. And I had plenty for donations. Cabbage is real easy to grow in Alaska. The next thing is my broccoli and cauliflower. I grow about 25 plants of each a year. 25 broccoli plants, 25 cauliflower plants. And I usually figure I can get, like, the cauliflower, you get one nice head. And the broccoli, you get the nice main head, and then the variety that I plant is the gypsy. Once you cut the main head, you get side shoots. And the side shoots are, they get about like that, which it all eats, But I do about 25 plants of each, and that gives me enough cauliflower and broccoli for what I'm going to eat for almost the whole year. It's about a couple of pounds per plant, on broccoli and cauliflower. Cucumbers grown in ideal conditions, with warm weather, long season, they can produce up to about 20 pounds per plant for the duration of the season. Up here in Alaska, I don't think we get that. I've never gotten that. I'm thinking it's closer to 10 pounds because of our shorter, cooler growing season. I can't put my cucumbers out until, second week of June, and I'm hoping to have what I need off of them by the end of August. And then that they don't freeze on me in August. But you can figure about 1 to 2 pounds of cucumbers per quart of pickles. I like to can about 50 quarts for the year. Steve eats about a quart of pickles a week, and so I have to have plenty of pickles for him. He uses them for snacks. But last year I planted 12 plants, and I canned 45 quarts of pickles. But I had pollination issues last year, and so I lost out on a lot of my cucumbers early in the season until the pollinators showed up. And then once the bees come, with the fireweed up here, then I did really well. I'm looking at, I would like, just for pickles, about 80 pounds of 100 pounds of cucumbers. And that sounds like a lot, but it depends the size of your cucumbers. You figure 1 to 2 pounds of cucumbers per quart of pickles. And if I want 50 quarts, I'm either going to do 50 to 100 pounds, depending on, what it takes. So that should put me at 5 to 10 plants for my garden. I'll do a little more than that because we eat them fresh eating and stuff like that, and cream cucumbers and whatever else you make with your cucumbers. So I'll probably do about 12 plants again, 12, 15 plants again. Now my onions, I order my onions from Dixondale Farm, and they come as plant starts. I don't plant sets, but plant starts. And they grow really nice big onions. And I do about 250 onions a year. And they store really well. And I don't plan for my onions for the entire year, that I'm going to have an entire year's worth of onions put up. I try to figure my onions for about 8 to 9 months. Because that's how my onions hold the best for that length of time. And so I do about 250 onions. So how many onions do you think you use in a week is what you need to figure out. And then, times that out by, 32 weeks, for 8 months, and see about how many onions you would need for that amount of time. And that'll give you an idea of how many onion plants to put in, or if you do sets, how many sets to put in. Lettuces, I plant lettuce to last for about a 2-month growing season, because you can't preserve your lettuce. It doesn't store. Excuse me. It doesn't store. So just plant what you think you will eat fresh, for a month or two. And you can also do succession planting with lettuce. You can start your lettuce early and have that. And then, the end of June, start another crop of lettuce. Or beginning of July, start another crop of lettuce. And that will give you more lettuce throughout your year. But you don't need rows and rows and rows of lettuce, because you get a lot of lettuce, because you cut your lettuce and it'll grow back, and lettuce goes a long ways. So you don't need tons of, I plant a couple of different types of lettuce, and I usually do a half row. My rows are 40 foot, not even a half row. I probably do 10-foot row of lettuces, and that's plenty for us. Things like turnips, peas, beets, etc. I don't plant beets. We don't eat them. But if you want to plant beets for pickled beets, you'll need to look up and see about how many beets go into a jar. But like turnips and peas, I grow snow peas. I don't grow shell peas or snap peas. Our season just isn't long enough for them here. And we don't eat a lot of that type, Turnips I grow for fresh eating. I like turnips fried, like fried potatoes. But again, I grow only as much as what I think I'm going to eat. Turnips will store for a little while in the refrigerator. I mean, you could probably store turnips a couple months in the refrigerator. But I don't plant for any, a big amount of that stuff, because I just don't want to waste it. And if I do, then I'll donate it. And it just depends how much room in my garden I have. Well, I hope this video gives you a little better idea of how to figure out about how many plants to plant in your garden. It can also give you an idea of how big your garden needs to be. It's just kind of a guideline to go by. If you're interested in the plant varieties that I plant here on our Alaskan homestead, click on the seed variety video that I have up. And as always, if you like the video, please comment, like, and subscribe. I hope you have a blessed day and happy gardening. I'll see you on the next video.